Okay, we are now on live streaming and the recording has started. So over to you, Worship.
Right. Welcome back. Hope you all had good lunch. Now that the blood supply is run to the stomach, the rest of the business should be easy. Next topic, 10.2, update on local alcohol policy. We got policy advisor Catherine Knight, and of course, Natasha Todd, group manager, is also here. Catherine.
To our elected members, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me all. I'm unmuted, I seem to be, that's great. Hopefully after that marathon effort of the morning, this will be a lot more straightforward, but it was a great debate. So just briefly to introduce this report, which is the update on the local alcohol policy, which will be taken as read, and this follows our briefing session on the matters raised in the report on the 15th of March. So as noted at that briefing, this report provides an update on work to develop a potential local alcohol policy and community engagement undertaken to date, in particular the community survey. The report summarising the results of the survey is included as an attachment for your reference, but just to note that the responses to the survey, of which there were 415 in total, indicate that there is broad support for the introduction of a range of local alcohol policy settings. As also noted in the briefing, due to our inability to engage with regional public health to date, we have been unable to complete the first research phase of the work, and this work will be resumed once resourcing allows. And finally, we will be communicating this update and the results of the survey to the community and our stakeholders through the usual channels, the website, stakeholder emails, and so on.
Right. I was wondering when your name popped up, Catherine Knight, whether you're the same person or not, and now I know it is.
I am. The one
Welcome.
and the same.
Welcome. Right, questions? Anybody? Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, this is just literally something that's come out 32 minutes ago, but I've seen the Mayor of Dunedin, Aaron Hawkins, busy tweeting about their experience with Dunedin City Council and local alcohol policies. And they've basically said that they've given up. Apologies about the noises in the background from the noisy kids. There are Kano Tauruses battling on a couch at the moment. But they were saying that the Dunedin City Council has effectively given up on using the local alcohol policy process, because they found it to be, what his words were, literally complete waste of time. And that was on the basis of the Alcohol Regulatory and Licensing Authority not allowing them to implement things that they can't prove will reduce harm, which his words are essentially means they can't try anything new. So I guess, are we sort of, is that sort of what we're likely to run into, especially say the big liquor chains and supermarket chains can appeal anything and grind this through the machinery? And do we need to look at something like Chloe Swarbrick's got an alcohol harm reduction bill. I'm not sure if it's coming out of the biscuit tin yet or something, but that's around harm minimisation techniques that I guess could potentially, if it gets passed, could provide a better avenue for achieving the outcomes in terms of reducing alcohol harm that we're wanting to achieve with this.
Thank you for that question, and through you, Your Worship the Mayor, just to respond as best I can. I haven't seen that media release or that.
It's literally a tweet 33 minutes ago, so no one else has seen it.
And I'm assuming that this is still they're going through the appeal process. Is that the stage it's at?
I'm not specifically sure what their process is, but it came up. There's a discussion about Chloe Swarbrick's bill because Auckland Council has just unanimously supported endorsing that alcohol harm reduction bill. So I was just, and then there's been a discussion which Mayor Hawkins has jumped in on, wanting to know more about it, because he says the ARLA appeals process essentially makes the LAP conversation redundant. So I guess that's my thing is, are we just, if we proceed with this, are we going to end up in a gridlock that eats up everyone's resources for no benefit?
If I may respond to that, certainly we have heard experiences from other councils that the process can be difficult, and it is there are commonly appeals and objections that are raised throughout, mainly from the proponents who benefit from a reasonably free system of supply of alcohol. So we are very mindful of this. This first step, though, is undertaking research so that we understand more about the level of alcohol harm and preferences in the community. Once we've done that stage, then it comes back to council to make a decision about whether or not you actually want us to proceed with developing up a policy. So, yeah, it is a staged process.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Coates.
Kia ora, Catherine, nice to see you again. Following the briefing that we had with you, the take that I was left with after discussions around the survey was that the survey recipient numbers was low in comparison to our population. What is your view in terms of the volume of submissions that we've got in comparison to other pieces of work typically done with councils around consulting? I think, for example, one of the other pieces of work recently we did on the community board, I think rep review is around the same sort of number. So statistically, although a small percentage, that is reasonably good numbers, although we would like more from a consultation perspective with councils. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. The point I was wanting to emphasise in the briefing was that actually, and Natasha has also really highlighted this too, that at this stage of the work, we are really focusing on building that evidence base. And the better and the more robust that is, the less likely that that appeals are likely to be successful. So those two questions are linked. The survey was less about building an evidence base and more, exactly as Natasha highlighted, about finding preferences, finding out a little bit more about just the general level of support for a potential policy. And in that respect, the survey was successful. You know, it had a good result in the sense that we did get a fairly strong indication that there was support. So that is helpful. It is not critical, though. That wasn't a statutory part of the process. So the actual consultation will happen when we have a draft policy. And at that point, we will go out to actual consultation as required by the legislation. So that will be a very critical stage when people are able to actually look at the proposed policy and give us their feedback. At this point, it was really more about getting a sense of people's behaviours, people's preferences, and people's thoughts on a potential policy. So that, I don't think that the fact that it was 415, perhaps a bit lower than the beach bylaw, for example, survey of a year or so ago, is not critical. It should not be holding us back. What we really need to focus on at this initial phase of work is building that evidence base, which we will do by partnering with regional public health and also the police and licensing officers.
Thanks, Catherine. Just to follow up, and I imagine the gaps that were shown through that survey will help inform the next pieces of work. So, for example, the low responses from youth and so forth. So, although there may be some gaps, it's certainly helpful in terms of informing where to from here.
Absolutely right. And I think the survey was also helpful in highlighting where we need to work a bit harder to reach certain groups. And absolutely, as you say, that includes youth, people under 30, that was a very underrepresented, and also Māori, who we know are disproportionately impacted by alcohol.
Thanks, Catherine. Your Worship, if there is no further questions, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Yeah. Any other questions? Going once, going twice? Councillor Prabhana.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Catherine. I just want to highlight a little point that you've sort of made, which will continue further down the line, but it probably needs some thought around it too, is that in terms of the survey, you know, you've highlighted again the profiles that were difficult to communicate with, to get information from, and I suppose that will also follow through, I would imagine, to the consultation in terms of those people actually having their voice as well. So I think it's really important to try and do some work between now and then. So you're actually hearing from the whole community, not one particular group, which might have completely different views from the other group. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Doesn't seem to be any other questions. Councillor Coates, you want to move? Coates.
Given how late it is in the day, I won't have a lot to say, although this piece of work is important, other than the quality of the work coming through from you, Catherine, and the team. Whoever's behind you has been outstanding. It was certainly very helpful through the briefing. So given where we are in the process, we're got a long way to go yet. Just happy to put this to the vote and leave it at that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Right. Anybody else? Councillor McCann.
Just noting on the record that I'm abstaining for voting this because of my role as DLC chair. Right.
Danica will record that. Okay, no other debate. I'm going to put this to the vote. Recommendation A, moved by Councillor Coates, seconded by Councillor Holiday. Please cast your votes.
It's in favour and one abstention from Councillor McCann.
Okay, that's carried. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, moving at a rapid pace. 10.3, open space strategy for adoption. Alison Law, Manager, Project Management Office. And of course, Mike Mendonca, Acting Group Manager, Place and Space.
Your Worship, I don't believe that we have Alison in the room, so if you just bear with me, I'll try and give her a call.
Did you say Alison's not here?
Oh, she's just come into the waiting room.
She's in the stables.
Hi, Alison. When you're ready, you can start presenting. Oh, she's just into the waiting room.
Kia ora koutou. Sorry, I was having trouble connecting. Are you ready for me?
Oh, yes. Sorry, Alison. Yeah.
Sorry.
When you are ready, you can come galloping out.
Thank you. And I guess just really...
Sorry, Alison, are you able to turn off the live stream in your background?
Kia ora koutou. Sorry. Is that better?
Yeah, thanks. We're just keeping going in echo.
Thank you. So just really pleased to bring the open space strategy to you for consideration of adoption, and just take the paper as read. So following on from the briefing that you've had, all the changes that have come through there were as per the discussion in the briefing. So just open to questions through you, Mr. Chair.
Open for questions. Don't all rush at the same time. No questions. Here we go, Councillor Holiday.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm actually not too sure how to approach this. I'll be quite happy to have some
Gently will do.
as to have some guidance. But I wanted to bring your attention to the submission from Grey Power. It's on page 231, and in it they made one request, which was, and I'll just quote it. In planning open space, they wish to have added into the document something around the age-friendly communities. They put a comment in here suggesting, writing in planning open spaces or sports field, the council will consider the principles of the WHO policy on age-friendly communities. Pretty sure I brought this up at the workshop, and I just don't feel that that's really come through strong enough. And I do apologise that perhaps I should have pushed it harder back then. But Grey Power is a significant portion of our community. This is the only thing they asked for. And also, as noted in their submission, we've actually sent a letter as a council to the World Health Organization stating that we intend to be an age-friendly community in the future. This document doesn't mention that at all. And I was wondering whether perhaps the paper brings this up in the answer to Grey Power. The response is on page 101, number 21, box 7. And it basically it's picked up in point 13 on page 248 or page 17 of the strategy, where it's an extra point 13 that's put in. It's a generalization point rather than a specific point. I'd like to ask that either another point be added, either point 14 that puts that statement in, or that statement's replaced by the one that's on 13. I also don't think that just mentioning it once is enough either. I would potentially say that the whakapapa area of this isn't necessarily the right one for this. And perhaps potentially it could be in the accessibility area, which is on page 257 or page 35 of the report, or the universal access and amenities section, page 262 or 44, or at least some reference to it so that we have something to work towards with regards to the age-friendly policies that will potentially be worked through with the age-friendly strategy that's being put in place at the moment with our Older Persons Council and the panel that's been set up through our Connected Communities group.
Alison, can you track that?
Sorry to bang all that like that, Alison. And it's something I'm happy to follow up through as well offline, but just wanted to put that out there for a general, some general feedback from the from council staff, but also from other councillors as well.
So from my point of view, if it's the desire to have it more obvious in the strategy, we can make that change. I think we would work through to find out the most appropriate place or places. And in addition to that, the action plan that comes out as a response, as the next stage of the strategy would go into that level of detail as well. So I guess just looking for direction if we want to add an extra specific item to the strategy.
I certainly want that to happen. I can't stress that strongly enough from my perspective, but I can't obviously talk from the represent the table on this as such.
Your Worship, Janice McDougall would like to comment.
Was that again, Tanika?
Janice would like to make a comment.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Just want to quickly note that obviously work on an age-friendly strategy or approach is underway and is likely to have an action plan developed as part of that. So I think, Councillor Halliday, what will be really important is to make sure that the action planning process attached to that is kept nice and close to the action planning process around the strategy that Alison has just referred too. So certainly we'll make sure that at an officer level, there's good alignment there.
So just for clarity, just at the moment, in the strategy, the open space strategy, there is no mention of our age-friendly communities approach as such. I appreciate the older person strategy will pick that up, but it would be quite nice to have a link there. Well, I would like to see a link there that's quite articulated specifically.
I think given that we don't actually have an agreed age-friendly strategy or approach or action plan at the moment, it is probably something where it's appropriate to bring more of the detail in at the action planning level, but certainly I can catch up and work offline with Alison and the team on that.
You happy with that? As long as you're tracking it, Councillor Halliday.
Yep, that's fine. I'd be happy for it to be followed through on. Would be much appreciated, but I would quite like that link there, just because we as a council have sent a letter to the World Health Organization saying that we are going to be taking an age-friendly communities pathway. And this is supposed to be a long-term plan that we're putting in here. And I think it's important that it's picked up in that, so it can be referred back to. But thank you for that.
Councillor Elliott.
Look, I'm in support of what you've said, Martin. But and we've tried to get age-friendly embedded into council strategy and policy. And I'm going to ask you, would you like to propose an amendment to the recommendations or an additional recommendation at this point? We've only got one there that we approved this strategy for adoption, but then put another one in that indicates or notes the future work that you want. I think that's really pragmatic to do that right now so that we get this in records, this conversation is put down and it's in public record.
That's an option. In the meantime, is anybody else? No. Given that, does anybody want to move?
I'm happy to take guidance from there on this with regards to that. I have confidence in the staff with regards to being included outside this. I don't necessarily think it needs to be a motion as such, but that's why I asked for guidance at the beginning.
Okay, thank you for that. So there's no other questions. Would somebody like to move Tanakitanga A, recommendations A? Councillor Holbrook. And can I have a seconder? Councillor Elliott. Councillor Holbrook. Right of intro.
Yeah, I won't say very much, but huge congratulations to the staff on this piece of work. I just think it's an outstanding strategy. The kaupapa and how they're laid out and the work that's gone on with stakeholders and the community has just been absolutely outstanding. And in this report, it's quite clear how we've taken that feedback on board and embedded it into the document. Heard what you said, Councillor Halliday, today, and really appreciate the staff taking that on board at this late stage, but also appreciate the importance of what you said. So very happy to move this recommendation today, and huge congratulations to the staff.
Very good. Open for debate. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, completely endorse the comments of Deputy Mayor Holborough, and I just didn't want to detract from anything from the quality of the document that's here and the work that's been put into it. This is just one small aspect that I'd like addressed, but generally it's a fantastic document, and I think it offers us some very, very good pathways into the future. So thank you very much.
Yeah, can I add my little bit to the messages of congratulations to, in fact, it is in tandem with the growth strategy and particularly with the intensification side. The value of open spaces close to highly intensified residential areas is critical for well-being. So this is a really good document to mitigate what can be the negatives of intensification. And there are some. So thank you very much for this amazing document. Anybody else? No, Councillor Holbrook, right of reply?
Waived.
Waived. Okay, the recommendation A, moved by Councillor Holbrook, seconded by Councillor Elliott. Can you please cast your votes?
Your Worship, we have 10 votes in favour.
Thank you, that's carried. We're now on item 10.4, amendments to the council delegation to staff. Sarah Watry, Governance and Legal Services Manager, and Janice McDougall. Sarah.
Kia ora koutou. I'll try and keep it brief because I appreciate you've had a long morning. So this paper covers a couple of matters. So firstly, it seeks council's support for some amendments to council's delegations to staff under the RMA. So particularly these are position and team related changes. So the changes relate to water and wastewater assets, the project management office, building, resource consents and parks, and the open space and environment teams. So the specific positions and changes are set out from page 2 to 4 of the paper. So I'll largely take those as read. And on that matter, we are seeking council's recommendation to those amendments. So that's the first part of this paper. The second matter covered in the discussion section of the report is relating to private requests for changes to plans and district plans of local authorities under clause 25 of schedule 1 of the RMA. Now there was discussion about this recently at a council briefing, and so we've provided some context. Natasha is here and is happy to take questions, I believe, on that matter. So I won't make any further comments, but happy to take questions.
Just checking, you got 2 aspects to it, but there's only one recommendation, right?
Correct. At this stage, unless council wanted to include an additional recommendation.
Okay, open for questions. No questions. Councillor McCann.
I'll make it very quick. If there is a conflict of interest, how would staff deal with that?
So in terms of a delegation under the RMA, is that what you're referring to? Yep. So staff would deal with a conflict of interest in a similar way to councillors. There's a conflict of interest form, so staff would need to declare that conflict of interest, and if the conflict would have an impact on them exercising their delegation, then it would be appropriate for them to defer that to somebody else.
So can I clarify?
Yes.
Sarah, you said if the conflict of interest would have an effect on them carrying out. What if it's a perceived conflict of interest? Where does that lie with staff?
So with conflicts of interest, they obviously range, and some are actual, some are perceived, as you mentioned. So really, it comes down to the specific scenario as to the actions that are needed to mitigate that conflict of interest. So for some perceived conflicts of interest, it might be appropriate for staff, for the management team to put in place a mitigation plan. And that mitigation, depending on the nature of the conflict, might be just declaring it, or it could extend to not exercising the particular function under the delegation. So it does depend on the specifics at play.
And could you just clarify for all of us what role legal plays in any of those decisions?
So legal are able to provide advice on any conflict of interest scenario. So quite often we have matters referred to us and we'll provide advice on the specifics.
Thank you.
Councillor Pavanov.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I apologise if this question has been asked. I got a phone call that I had to take. So when you look at the list of recommended amendments, a lot to do with about accessing property, et cetera. And when I actually looked into the RMA regulations here, it talks about those people need to be enforcement officers. And some of these positions are new positions, and I cannot see any reference to these people being given the delegation of being of enforcement officers. Could you please clarify that?
Yeah, so that, look, enforcement officer is a specific term under the Act. So it doesn't necessarily relate to the position title. There is some specific wording that is brought through onto the warrants that are issued to officers, where the delegations that they're exercising are regulatory ones. So the fact that it isn't referenced in these delegations isn't an issue from my perspective.
So it's my understanding that to be an enforcement officer, you've got to be issued a warrant. Do these people have these people being issued warrants, or are going to be issued warrants?
Yeah, so some of the existing positions will have existing warrants, and so amendments will be required to the warrants that they have where there is a change. And so there's a whole process surrounding this. So the first step is that council delegate to the chief executive and staff, and from there the chief executive can in some cases make further delegations, and then that translates through to the warrants, which are signed off sometimes by council and in other instances by the chief executive, depending on what the legislation requires.
Okay, thank you. So my further question is, I know at times we've had conversations around some of the bylaws that have been put in place, and then when it comes to the enforcement side of it, we hear that council does not have staff who are warranted or they are enforcement officers to be able to do this work. I'm just wanting to know what gaps will still be available, what gaps are still going to be there to for council staff as enforcement officers to actually be able to enact some of these conditions of bylaws, please.
So
can you just hold that? Mr. Jefferson, have you got some wisdom to add?
Myself. There you go. I'm finally unmuted. I'm not sure that I can guarantee, Mr. Chairman, that it's wisdom, but look, I'm just picking up on Councillor Provanov's question. All of the staff are warranted under the Local Government Act, and I'd be quite happy to talk to Jocelyn offline. The issue primarily when it comes to enforcement is actually we've got extremely limited powers under the LGA, even though all of the staff are warranted. And obviously Sarah will answer from that administrative point, but operationally we've extremely limited powers. We've got no powers, as we know, with the beach bylaw and those things to stop vehicles. So that's the critical issue, and one that's been on the agenda since 2002 when the Act came in. And of course, I think government are reluctant to delegate more powers to us to do some of those things that we need to do. And I just hope that helps and provides a bit of context.
Thank you for that, Mr. Jefferson. And I certainly understand, with some of those bylaws, it's other departments such as the police who actually have the powers to actually to do anything. But I suppose then my question then also relates to having conditions and bylaws that that there's actually, so you're saying that by having some of the conditions and some of the bylaws that we have, there aren't any enforcement officers who can actually act on them?
Again, through the chair, I think conditions in the bylaw were largely around permitting and seeking permission to do certain things, whether it's trading in the public place. We've got the powers to manage those, but it's that extra step, as we're finding with the beaches bylaw and the issues that we're having. If I use that as an example, the ability to address those goes way beyond the conditions that we can put in the bylaw. They sit outside, use of a road, stopping vehicles, requiring details from registered owners, those sorts of things. So the conditions that we put in our bylaw are appropriate, but they largely relate to seeking permission to do things in the public place. And I wonder if I've actually confused things for some of the members now.
So I understand in terms of the police, but in terms of, like, for example, I think, with the freedom camping, and correct me if I'm wrong here, there hasn't seemed to be an issue for some time now, but it was my understanding it was actually other contractors who were going around checking to see whether or not people were parking in the wrong place and for too long, rather than enforcement officers. And I'm just clarifying whether or not how that's working now and whether enforcement officers are actually doing that.
If, again, through the chair, freedom camping is a legislative issue. It's that misalignment between national legislation, bylaws and policies, and I think that's been well canvassed locally. But again, that is about the system, the end-to-end systems not lining up, and national legislation permitting some activities that we've got no powers to enforce.
Okay.
Right. Have you got any other questions, or you can take them offline? Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, in terms of that, picking up on the discussion that Councillor McCann was having, in terms of these delegations being with staff around private plan changes, is that fairly consistent with how other councils handle these?
So I'm happy to answer that question through you, Mr. Mayor. So I did do a quick canvass of some of our neighbouring councils, and it does appear that most of them do have it don't have it delegated down to staff. It is sit with full council.
Okay, and did they elaborate on what their rationale was for that, given that we're sort of proposing to do the opposite here?
No, I didn't get any detail as to why that was. But this, yeah. So look, it's up to the councillors whether or not they want to make a change to what the current delegations are. Totally within your realm to do that.
And just also following on from the questions that Councillor McCann was asking, in terms of around the management of conflicts of interest, that presumably includes things around the potential for predetermination and that as well?
Yes, it would.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Randall.
Yeah, my question is just a general one. I'm concerned about the way we are pronouncing some names, surnames. Now, Pat Dignan, that's his name, that's how his name is pronounced. But no one, apart from myself, who actually grew up with him, pronounced his name correctly this morning. And then poor old Councillor Pravanov, her name has been mispronounced twice just recently. So I just wondered, can we somehow correct the pronunciation of surnames? You, Mr. Mayor, can call me what you like, but I think other people.
Everybody heard that, right?
What?
That I can call you whatever I like.
Yeah. I don't mind. Sticks and stones don't break my bones.
Councillor Randall, thank you very much for that. Councillor Compton, if you've got further questions, your hand's still up. Nope, if not, no other questions.
Sorry, Your Worship, you just need to unmute. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, you're muted.
Perhaps the Deputy Mayor could step in while we try to sort out the Mayor's microphone.
Can you hear me now? Yep, okay. Right, I'm moving this recommendation.
Sorry, Your Worship, we have got Councillor Halliday and Councillor Pavanov.
What, I second this?
Questions, I believe.
Councillor Halliday seconds it. So can you all cast the vote, please?
Sorry, Your Worship, Councillor Halliday has a question.
There was a question, my apologies.
Oh, you got a question?
Yeah, my apologies for the length it took me to put my hand up. Look, I'm just a little bit concerned about about this. Private plan changes haven't been around for us for a while because we haven't had an operative district plan. Just a little bit concerned these are going to potentially slip under the radar without the council table knowing about it. How are we going to be aware or made aware that there's a private plan change in process as such? If delegation's been taken away from, well, not taken away from the table, it's been endorsed as staying as it is. But I appreciate there's a process for the private plan change, but I'd be quite keen to know that an application is being made or is going through the system as such. Will this be picked up in the EMB, or will we be? I'm assuming there's not going to be lots of them. Or what's the process for bringing awareness to the council table?
So absolutely, doing that through the EMB would be the appropriate channel for us to make sure that councillors were aware of any private plan change applications that were received.
And if I could just ask Natasha, coming back to our strategies that we have in place, especially around growth and where we've put designations, if you like, if we're getting obviously a private plan change would be against those. So is there that's not going to automatically count against the private plan change as such? You know, it's basically a clean slate approach with regards to moving into a private plan change discussion as such?
There are a range of considerations that would be made in terms of how any private plan change was dealt with. So that does include looking at the existing planning documents and other relevant documents.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, Jocelyn Pravanov, have you got a question or you?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. I would like to ask, please, whether the recommended amendments can be taken one at a time, please.
You mean you want to go through everything one after the other?
Well, another way of looking at it is maybe separating out the planning one.
So you're looking, the first one is from.
Can I just clarify, Councillor Pavanov, are you meaning the private plan change one, wanting that to be separated out, or other planning
or the
ones?
consultant planner one, so giving those the delegations to that person? I assume it's a consultant rather than a full-term. This is a new staff member type person, is it, rather than a permanent employee?
That's correct. It's where we've engaged external consultants to assist with our planning work.
Yeah. So, well, I suppose to separate that one out would be the most pragmatic way to do it. If there's any appetite to do that, please.
So the one that you got here on page 289 has got one consultant planner.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I'm looking on the website, and it hasn't got page numbers, which is not actually that easy. So I don't know what page number it is. I'll have to change my.
Yeah, but that's the section that says consultant planner.
Correct. Yes, correct.
Can I ask for staff guidance as to what difference that will make?
Yes, so perhaps if I can give an example, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So given it's more than likely, for example, that when we receive private plan changes in, we will be commissioning consultants to be able to process them based on the existing resourcing within the team and the challenges in finding sufficient staff who have got the right qualifications at the moment because there's such a high demand. So we are wanting to make sure simply that consultant planners that we do use have got the right delegations in order to be able to do the jobs that we're asking of them.
So if as you, Councillor Pavanov was suggesting we take that out, what does that mean?
That would mean that they wouldn't be able to exercise any delegated functions, and everything that they did would have to be countersigned by a staff member who did have the right delegations.
So would that be a pain in the proverbial? I mean, is this superfluous and what is it? I don't understand what difference this makes. Look, can I ask councillors if you've got an appetite for that? No? No? There doesn't seem to be any support for that.
Okay, thank you for trying.
Okay. I've got others, Councillor Holbrook.
No, I'm good. I just had a comment about that, but that's all sorted now, so no worries.
Councillor Compton.
So I guess my question picks up on this discussion about private plan changes. What changes would we have to make to these delegations if we wanted that approve, accept, reject for a private plan change to come to council rather than be with staff? What changes would we have to make to these delegations? Or was that asking a question that would sort of result in this paper having to come back in a couple of weeks' time?
Not necessarily, and I'm sure Sarah can speak to it, but my understanding it would be as simple as revoking, adding an additional recommendation to revoke the delegations under clause 25 of Schedule 1 and the appropriate part there, but I'll leave it to Sarah to add anything else.
That's correct. So staff currently hold the delegation under the relevant clause of Schedule 1 of the RMA, and so it would be a recommendation to revoke that delegation to staff.
And that would result in those decisions coming to council?
They would need to come to council, and there would need to be a workaround operationally, just in terms of the timeframes, which is, the context is set out in the report. That I think the timeframe is 30 working days. So we would need to look at how that fits with strategy and ops and council meetings.
Cool. Can I just, I guess, foreshadow that I'd like to do that? If someone can help me with the wording on that, the specific clause and the details.
So would that be an additional? It will be an amendment. It's not an additional recommendation; it's an amendment.
Amendment to the original. Yeah, that would make sense, wouldn't it? Because we approve the delegations amended by that, don't we?
Yeah. So we need the amendment. So do you want? Have you got some words for it?
I'm just hoping that Sarah might be able to translate my intent relative to the specifics in the schedule there.
Yes, so we could amend it and at the end of the recommendation that's currently there, you could add something like, with the exception that council revokes the existing delegation to staff under clause 25 of Schedule 1 of the RMA 1991.
It's under clause 25 of Schedule 1 of the RMA. I'll just email that through now. Do we want that as the same or separate? Because I imagine some people might want to vote separately on that.
It might be easier to include it separate for the sake of clarity.
I'll email that through to people.
Make sure you got that going to Tanika so she can put it on the screen.
You want to go to Councillor McCann's question? Oh, sorry.
Your Worship, could I get Mr. Power to clarify the comment that he made in the chat? I'm not sure what's meant by.
Say that again.
I'm just wondering if Mr. Power can clarify his comment in the chat. I'm not quite sure what it means.
Mr. Power.
Sorry, I've just picked up on this conversation, and I just want to, I may have misunderstood where Councillor Compton is coming from, but in relation to any power that has been delegated by council, it is possible for the council to impose conditions on how that power is exercised. So I just wonder if that might be an easier way of achieving the same objective.
So would that be a I guess a confirmation step on whatever the delegation had decided, or how would that work in actuality?
What's the wording that will entrench that?
So, well, no wording would be, no amendment would be required at all. So it could work in relation to a specific decision around a plan change that councillors were aware of. They, might look at that proposed plan change and say, no, we're uncomfortable with that being, we want to see that come back to council. So they could issue or they could impose a condition that we want to exercise that power in this case.
But for that to happen, we need an access route for all private plan changes to come to council, or at least before through the elected members bulletin.
Yeah.
Right? Then, but I think you'll have a logistics problem in terms of the time period in which staff have got to respond to it. We go back to that square one.
Well, I think it comes back to the point Natasha was making. Most of these private plan changes are signalled well in advance. They don't normally turn up just out of the blue. So they normally come about as a result of discussions that have taken place. So, and Natasha may correct me here, but I would have thought we would be in a position to notify council well in advance, well, at the same time that the application for private plan change is received. And I wouldn't expect there to be too many issues if council then decided, no, we want to impose a condition. And I guess what you would need to think about is who could impose, or how the council would go about imposing a condition in relation to a specific decision.
See, I see difficulties in that. What we need is a clear direction, clear accessibility for councillors to have the information in the first place and be able to say, okay, on this one and that one, we want those ones to come back to council for confirmation. But what process do we use for that? Apart from if we take off this recommendation now, what other process can we trigger to enable that to work? That auditing by the governance side.
I can jump in here,
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor. So we can include a condition or a note within the delegation, the current delegations document, that notes that in exercising the delegation under clause 25, schedule 1, that staff will notify council of requests for private plan changes, and then we can build that into our process whereby councillors are notified via the EMB, and then have it, through that notification, council then has the ability to consider a particular request for a private plan change at an existing meeting, or if there was something that needed to be urgently considered, convene an urgent meeting.
So what do we have to do with the recommendation now to entrench that?
We council could make a recommendation that conditions be imposed to the exercise of the current delegation to staff under clause 25 schedule 1 of the RMA, and that council are notified as soon as possible of requests for private plan changes by staff.
So can you draft that as an amendment?
Yes, I can draft something and send it through to Fiona.
Yeah, but just before then, Councillor Compton, you happy with that? Can't hear you.
I guess my question is, again, it's a sort of what you've been alluding to, Your Worship, is how does that process work within that 30-day time frame? Because that's essentially, I guess, another step versus either having the delegation with staff or having the decision come straight to council. You've got to build in this other step where we get notified, then we have a discussion. Presumably, if we want to impose conditions, then we've got to have a council meeting to impose conditions. Then you've got to have another council or committee meeting to make the decision, don't you? So I guess my concern is that it does create some issues around that time frame versus going for either one of those extremes. I guess my next question would be, is this time sensitive that we have to pass this today, or is it something that we could revisit at the next meeting on the 7th, just given the,
you don't want to rush it?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, true. What does staff feel about that? You got the gist of what the councillors are saying, and do we need time to bed it down so we're not doing it in a rush and getting it wrong?
I think that sounds sensible. Natasha?
Yeah, certainly from my point of view, this we know there are some private plan changes that are being worked on by different parties, but we're certainly not hearing that there are any that are going to be coming in within the next few weeks.
So, okay, we will stick to the current recommendations. We have now given staff directions to bid down access for councillors to audit that part of it. And can I ask Councillor Compton to liaise with the council staff to enable that and keep the councillors informed?
So that would be in the way of having an additional, a recommendation come back at a future meeting around that. Yep, that's fine.
Okay, was that settled? Natasha and Sarah, you got that one?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so we go back to the recommendation.
Worship, we have Councillor Coates and Councillor Pavanov.
Councillor Coates, I'm in a rush.
Sorry, Your Worship. Look, it's kind of proceeded since I put my hand up, but I was going to ask exactly the same question. As we're about to go to vote on it, I felt we needed more information, and was it time sensitive? So I think it is very prudent to carry this over and have a well-informed discussion of what's involved for council in terms of considering that. In terms of a question, and I appreciate we want to move this discussion on, the plan change 84 around the airport, is that similar to the pathway that we're talking about in terms of decisions coming back to council around receiving and considering the plan change? Because that's, for me, is just understanding what the new process looks like, the timeframes, what's involved in terms of the considerations in terms of the impacts and so forth. So is plan change 84 an example of how that would work?
I believe Natasha has had to leave. My understanding is that it is an example of this. I don't know if Wayne, you're able to speak to that, or one of the other GMs in the room.
Look, I'm happy to move it on and we can discuss it in the workshop. But for me, it was just getting my head around what the process would look like, and I thought that might be an example of it. But I think I'm pleased that Gwen's happy to carry that through, and we discussed that in a, whether it's a workshop or whatever. I think that's a really good approach.
So just make sure that Gwen, you're keeping track of what's happening. Okay, Councillor Bravano, quick question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So clarity around Gwyn, whether this is about making decisions or, as the Mayor suggested, being informed of these being informed of the decisions made by other people.
My position was both.
Well, it's my understanding this is about us making the decisions, not being kept in the loop more.
My understanding is, in order for us to make the decisions, we need to be kept informed.
So Gwyn, so my other question, actually, before Gwyn he's the one who's moved this, which is obviously on the table. My other question is,
no, it's not.
My question is, can we please know how other councils who have the delegation to councillors work through this, please? Not necessarily now, but
yeah, that can be added to the report that comes back in the next meeting.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was Gwyn's move wasn't seconded. We were just discussing it, and then we've landed in a very good spot.
Yes, I know. Okay.
Yeah, and if I can just answer the question there, it was about the decision-making aspect of it.
Yes.
But again, that's something that I think, yeah, we can address through this coming back.
Yeah. Cool. So nobody else coming back to the recommendation. I'm moving this recommendation. Can I have a seconder? Councillor McCann, second. Councillor McCann, seconded. Can you all cast your votes, please?
I believe he has a question, Your Worship.
Guru, can I confirm, just because it's getting long in the day, have we removed the delegation that we're effectively discussing and moving everything else? Because we can't move the full thing and then come back and rediscuss it in a month's time. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah.
There is no recommendation relating to the private plan change. There's just a section in the paper where there is discussion about it for if councillors decided today that they wanted to make a recommendation. So there's no issue in passing the recommendation that exists.
Thank you. In which case I'll second.
Right. So moved by the Mayor, seconded by Councillor McCann. Cast your votes.
Your Worship, we have 11 votes in favour.
Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. 10.5, reports and recommendations of standing committees in the community.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much.
I'll speak to this report. So I'd like to take the report as read, but just wanted to acknowledge that the request made by elected members at our last council meeting to document a process by which recommendations come to council from community boards has been added to our work programme, but it is subject to prioritisation. So we anticipate that this will be started over the coming months. And so I'd like to leave that there.
Right, that's useful. And I think at the chair's meeting, we did raise and have a discussion with acting CEO Sean Mellon. That went very well. Okay, if there are no questions or anything of the sort, can somebody move?
We have Councillor Pavano for the question, Your Worship.
Councillor Pavano.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you, Tanika, for those comments. I'm just clarifying what will happen in the meantime in relation to recommendations from community boards, and whether or not they will be accepted or whether they will be only noted in the meantime, please.
I can answer that. Kia ora again. We'll continue with the same process we have currently until we do the work to look at whether that process should change. It's a long-standing practice that we follow, whereby recommendations are characterised in the way that they are, and I guess leaving the opportunity to propose something different in the hands of the councillors around the table. So in the meantime, until we do some more work, that's the approach that from a staff perspective will continue.
Right, thank you. Can somebody move that recommendation to receive the report? Councillor Holbrook moved and seconded. Councillor Elliott. Can you all cast your votes?
Councillor Pravanov, is that a question you have, or?
Well, I have to thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Tanika.
We are voting now. I'm not going
I
to
thought
take questions at the moment. What's the vote?
Your Worship, we have 10 votes in favour.
Okay.
I haven't received a vote from Councillor Pravanov yet.
Carried. Confirmation of minutes, item 11. Any queries about the minutes?
Councillor Pravanov, is that a question you have?
Councillor Pravanov, question.
Oh, thank you. I've had my raised hand a number of times that keeps on being lowered. I have a question.
Are you asking question on the minutes?
The question I have is, can a recommendation be put to this council to have recommendations from the community board?
I'm sorry, we're finished with that paper.
As I said, my hand has been up a number of times.
I know that. I know that, but we're finished with that. You can raise that issue offline, or when we come to the end of the agenda where it's not part of the agenda, you can deal with that then. So at the moment now, we're dealing with the recommendations on the confirmation of minutes for the February 24th meeting. Also, if there are any queries about the minutes, otherwise, can somebody move that recommendation to accept it as a true and correct record? Councillor Elliott, you got your hand up? Are you moving it? Councillor Elliott moved it. Councillor Hanford seconded it. All those. Okay.
Your Worship, we have 9 votes currently in favour.
Okay, carried. Now we're into public speaking time for items not on the agenda. Councillor Pravanov, you want to raise an issue now?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was wishing to put a recommendation to the last item that councillors accepted or approved recommendations from community boards, if that is what the recommendation was put forward, and that's of course if the councillors agree to it, rather than just noting them.
I suppose that's part of the discussion that Janice, you need to have.
Well, as I said, this is an ongoing problem that really it discourages community boards from actually making any recommendations or decisions, which is not actually, I think, is appropriate for elected members. And obviously, it seems to be the will of some staff members to let that continue.
Right, so that's the point of discussion. Anybody got any views on that?
Your Worship, Janice would like to comment on that.
Janice.
Given that we're still live streaming, I think it's important just to acknowledge Councillor Pravanov's last comment that it would seem the will of staff is to squash the enthusiasm or ability for community boards to make recommendations to council. I want to be very clear that that is not the position that staff have taken here. I think a couple of points of context that might be helpful are that you will know from reading this report that the recommendations that come from community boards are very varied and range from things that would have little operational impact to things that would have significant operational impact. For staff to acknowledge in a report that we recommend that the council accepts the recommendation of the community board, that would require potentially significant work ahead of time. It would potentially require preparing reports. And I think the general approach that we follow on a range of issues is that we engage in work as an organisation at the request or direction of council, not at the request or direction of community boards. It is any member of the council is able to move an amendment to a resolution within a meeting discussing the reports and recommendations from community boards paper. Similarly, there are processes that councillors can use to request that the organisation take a look at matters that are outlined in that report. So please don't underestimate the change in process or work that might be required to deviate from the way that has been approached in the past. And it is because of, the size of the work to even look at that we're saying right now, in the midst of a pandemic, when we have staff impacts from the pandemic, when we have workloads that are under pressure, we can't look at that right now, but please have my assurance that we will look at it potentially in the latter part of this triennium, ahead of getting things in place for the new triennium, depending on how these next few months shake down. But we will keep you informed about the timing as life starts to settle down a bit.
Right.
So if I can respond to that, Mr. Chair.
Go on.
So, the way the process goes for community boards to be able to make recommendations is through a report that has come to that board. It's my impression that community boards often get a lot of pushback to be able to allow a paper, so a paper is not written, so they cannot make a recommendation on it. So I think community boards are resorting to making these recommendations because they have no other avenue to try and make a difference in the communities that they're actually representing. And I suppose this is actually not just a short-term COVID issue, this has been a long-term issue.
Right, I don't want this to become a debate, but
that's what I say, thank you.
Janice has said that work will go on in terms of discussing how this process is going to work and streamline it. The only other issue is, because in the meantime it's going to be business as usual, the only other point I'd like to make is quite rightly the chair of the Waikanae board raised the issue of recommendations raised, and then there's no staff response during the council meeting to those items. There's a gap, of a very long gap, which I expect the staff to sort out before the next council meeting, if there are any outstanding issues from the community board. Right, so we're done with that. I'm now.
Your Worship, I believe that we've got Councillor Elliott and Councillor Randall.
Elliott, Randall, Martin.
Thank you. Look, as I want to raise a different issue during public speaking, do Councillors Randall or Halliday want to speak on this same issue that Councillor Bravano was speaking on?
Hey, look,
No.
I took the liberty of raising this particular issue.
Yeah.
There was no public speaking time as such. But I don't want this to expand to a sort of a councillor's big, long debate on all sorts of issues.
Your Worship, all I want to know is if we can please tie down a time to have a discussion with you as a council decision-making board about the three waters. We have had a workshop, but we haven't been able to talk.
No. I've emailed the chief executive to provide a position paper from the staff perspective, and I will be sending you all the other documents that we need to have a look at, including the response from the DIA to our submission, the 8-week letter of submission, which is called. So that's coming. I'm just waiting for the chief executive to give us a time when the position paper will be tabled. That's where we are. And I've also asked the the Communities for Democracy, Local Democracy. They have sent their paper also, their response to the government's working group's recommendations. So all that will land on the table, so we can have a real good go at it.
Yeah, any idea of a timeline around that?
I just said that I'm just waiting for the chief executive to give me a date for the position paper.
Okay, thanks. That's appreciated.
Cool. Bernie, then Janet.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I agree with what Councillor Pravanov said. I mean, and also I take a bit of an issue with Janice. Janice is a long established custom or policy, but I remember in the previous training when I was on the community board, early on, within the first maybe year, we would make recommendations. The community board make recommendations to council. And I remember Councillor Benton then taking some of those recommendations and moving them as a motion. And there was no disagreement. And if we look back at the minutes, they're probably reflected there. And this policy that Janice is referring to seemed to get changed halfway through that last triennium and has continued. And I agree with Councillor Pravanov that we need to look at that.
I think
seriously, if we believe in community.
Thank you for that, Bernie. I think the way forward is Janice is going to be working on this matter. And I think at the chair's meeting, we were assured that there'll be discussions with the committee board chairs on how to progress this. And so I'm quite happy that it's something is moving. Councillor Holbrook.
Your Worship, I'm happy to move that we move into public excluded.
Yep, I'll second that. Everybody, you got to vote on this too.
Your Worship, I can see 10 votes in favour.
Right, carried. We're now in public exclusion.
Your Worship, just bear with me while I turn off the live streaming and the
Oh,
recording.
good.